will be then provided during budget deliberations. Tonight's a great night to ask those questions and ask that information. Just a reminder that budget consultations, the open houses will be next week, Wednesday the 19th and Thursday the 20th. So any members of the community that want to attend and ask questions and see another form of budget overview, certainly we welcome that attendance. And then the budget deliberations will take place the following week, January 26th, 27th, starting at 6, and then if required, February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd at 6. So just a reminder that this night is really the introduction. So this is where we together go over a high-level overview of what this budget contains, and then it's really council's role as we move into budget deliberations as budget committee to take on ownership of the budget and do that hard work to finalize what will guide priorities for the next year. With that, I'll turn it over to Don, I believe, to start the presentation.
Thank you very much. Council and members that are the community that are watching this evening, we're just going to spend a few minutes just doing an overview of the council priorities and strategic initiatives that drove many of the decisions that we had in preparing our budget. So I will walk you through at a high level, and then I'll turn that over to Gord for details about the budget presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you, Steve. So we have 7 different pillars in our strategic plan. These are the major building blocks that we have to consider when we're looking at our long-term community health and growth. 4 large priority areas that you can see on the screen here. And all of those areas are receiving attention at various times during the budget cycle or the term of council. There's a greater weighting on some of these over others, but it's important to remember that over the long term, we have to pay attention to all of these or there's going to be serious consequences. So we believe that the budget being presented to you today is a balanced budget that considers each and every one of these different elements. And these are clearly things that have lined up with council's term priorities. Next slide, please. So financial sustainability, certainly that's something we think about during budgets. It's also how we finance our decisions, making sure that, you know, as much as possible, we develop a pay-as-you-go philosophy where we're not having to borrow money that's going to cost the community's taxpayers more in the long run. We're trying to do that as a pay-as-you-go. We've also made great strides over the past 12, 13 years or so to pay down the municipality's debt. And that comes back in a very positive way to reduce the burden on taxpayers in the longer term. So we tried to make very responsible decisions, and council has held the course on some very sound financial sustainability and found sound financial decisions. Open, transparent government. Our budget chair has already invited the community for the next several weeks to, you know, stay very involved in the budget process to offer council not only your questions but also your thoughts in terms of where you'd like our budget to go. It's every year it's a matter of balancing what services we want and how much we want to pay for those services. So I think council values a great deal the feedback from our community, and that's part of an open, transparent government. So we're encouraging people to continue to do that. Resiliency is making sure that as we make our decisions, we're making decisions with the understanding that we could be at any time facing, you know, major challenges. COVID is, you know, obviously a great example in the past 2 years. And more recently, the gas releases in the community of Wheatley. And we needed to make sure that we had sufficient reserves so that we could tackle those challenges. And I think the community should be comforted to know that we have been able to do just that. So we'll continue that with this budget process. Council every 4 years provides our administration with their term priorities. These are the 5 areas. Growing our population to support economic and labor force needs. This also has a direct impact on the budget. The sweet spot for any community is to make sure that you have sufficient growth and adding new people to come to the community that are contributing to the tax base and helping pay for the cost of maintaining our community services. If we have a larger population that's growing and our economy that's growing, it reduces the overall burden on everyone. So council has made significant investments in our growth strategy. With any growth, you require a certain amount of infrastructure to support the growth. And so this budget also includes components where we feel that we have to make some investments in our infrastructure to support the growth that's needed for our community. There are also some other related infrastructure costs, things like recreational facilities that council believes we have to continue to invest in. Improving our transportation, public transit, and active transportation options has been seen over the past several years to have increasing, pardon me, has been something that the community has indicated is desirable, and we have many people that are increasingly relying on public transportation as an option to commute or to and from work or school or so on. So we're continuing to make investments there. And lastly, there is a recognition that we don't always have to invest more money. Sometimes there's a choice to look at our inventory of physical assets and wherever possible consider rationalizing those services or taking some out of commission to reduce the overall costs. Next slide, please. So a few other council priorities. Environmental sustainability has come to the front burner over the past 3 years. We have a climate change action plan. Some of our largest threats right now have to do with flooding and erosion issues, but there's broader issues as well, given that a lot of our community economy is based on agriculture. Changes to our climate also have a direct impact on our ability to grow crops and be successful in agriculture. So we have to take a long-term view of our climate change strategy. Our growth that we've talked about, there's always a balance between encouraging growth, but doing it in a way that's going to be considering the impact on the environment. And we've also looked at our strategies on the long term that we continue to understand how we have to adapt to climate change and also maintain our responsibilities as being good stewards of the environment. And one of the best ways or most important ways to do that is looking at the costs of our energy usage and looking at ways that we can actually do that in a way that's both less impactful on the environment and also is overall reducing our costs. Community wellness, COVID comes to the forefront when you look at some of the community wellness things that have been front and center for the last 2 years, but mental health and addiction services are also something that has been exacerbated or worsened by the impacts of COVID. We're continuing to make investments and work with community partners to address mental health issues and addiction issues. It's important to do that in a way that's going to provide an equity for all people in our community. It's not just providing the same service, but it's doing it in a way that we're considering the different needs of our residents and trying to do it in a way that we're helping to reduce poverty and the impacts of poverty. Affordable housing. We have had significant incentives through our community improvement plan to try and increase our housing, but there is still an urgent need for affordable housing in our community, and that continues to be something that we focus on to try and provide support or incentives. It's not just the physical infrastructure we need, but it's also social infrastructure, providing for things like parks and libraries and places where people can meet and interact with each other is also deemed to be important for quality of life, and it's something our residents have told us is important to them. Examples of that, we look at the trails and our active transportation. In the last 2 years, when we've had many restrictions with COVID, people's ability to go out to our parks and use our trails and bike or walk with their families has been a great way to reduce mental stress and also to enjoy our community, notwithstanding some of the other restrictions. So those are a summary of council's priorities. The other piece that overarching is this council has looked at every opportunity to try and to encourage community engagement and look for ways that we can outreach to residents to get their impact or input as to how we want to build our community on a go-forward basis. It's important that our community has an opportunity to help guide where we're going to go. That has been extraordinarily difficult over the past 2 years with some of the COVID restrictions, but activities like tonight where we're having virtual meetings or doing outreach or having increased number of surveys and so on is an attempt to try and continue to survey or to reach out to our public to ensure that they have input and to help guide the decision making that council and administration has to make week over week. And that's something that this council has continued to emphasize as being critically important to our future. Okay. Corporate priorities, you'll see these reflected over the course of the budget discussions. Emergency management, front and center. We've had some, we probably as much as almost any other community in Canada have been challenged by a number of major emergencies. We have to continue to make sure that we're able to respond to those in a way that's going to help support our residents and to lessen the impact on our community, be it both their health and lives or their property. That's a tall order when we've had multiple emergencies happening at the same time, but we need to continue to focus on that area. Housing and homelessness, major challenge for our community. And that's a fairly complex issue. It's also linked to mental health and addiction issues. There was a strategy that we brought before council in the fall or in December, to look at how we can actually do a better job with our homeless and housing strategy. Infrastructure investments. We've talked for a number of years about the need to have a comprehensive asset management plan that would both maintain and be prepared to replace our investments in our physical inventory. That continues. Every year we currently have about a $40 million annual deficit for our infrastructure investment. That's the amount we should be investing to maintain our existing infrastructure. So council has endorsed a 20-year plan to get us there. This year we want to continue on that road. There's no easy way to get around that. We have to continue to make those investments if we're going to reduce the gap and be able to provide for the services our citizens expect. And again, our community growth strategy, if we can support growth, we're going to be able to do that in a way that's going to lessen the tax burden on all of our residents. Budget Chair, that's the conclusion of my remarks. I'll turn it over to Gord Quinton, and he'll walk us through some additional information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don, for setting the stage for our presentation tonight. I'm Gord Quinton, Chief Financial Officer for the municipality. And before I get started into the agenda, I do have a few opening comments. 2020 and 21 have been very difficult for all staff serving the residents of Chatham-Kent, and the start of 2022 doesn't seem to be improving as we face our current wave of COVID-19. We are all definitely concerned with
I can't see anything. So Eric's helping me.
We're all concerned with our hospitalization levels and the workload of public health and all healthcare workers. The addition of the devastation that occurred in Wheatley during the pandemic has stretched every division. And I assure you that the impact of COVID and the Wheatley disaster are at the top of mind of staff as we created the 2022 draft budget that we delivered tonight. We are a resilient community, and therefore we bring you a truly sustainable budget tonight. It properly funds what needs to be funded. As you heard with the KPMG Core Services-Based Budget Efficiency Review that was presented to Council on November 22nd, we are a very efficiently run municipality, given our geography, our drainage systems, and the infrastructure we support, and our growing population. But that did not sway staff for searching for savings and new revenues to help with this budget, and I'm happy to report that over $1 million of savings is found, which we will detail later tonight. I'm very proud of the work everyone has done throughout the organization to put this budget together, and I want to personally thank every one of them on behalf of the entire executive management team for the sacrifices they have made in keeping the municipality on track over the last 2 years. So now let's get started on our community, our future, and our 2022 draft budget. Next slide, please. So our task tonight, we were tasked by council to meet a budget target of CPI, which is 3.3% for our operational needs, and approval for our infrastructure spending. Funding 2021, so last year's base budget requirements resulted in a 1.64% need to replace one-time sources of income in the 2021 budget, and continued funding of our previously approved financing plan for the 2017 asset management plan, which includes our 1% for infrastructure spending, year 4 of this council's directed service infrastructure funding plan of $550,000, and in lieu of asset divestment that I'll explain further in the presentation. Council decisions, so that there's been some past decisions that still come back to add to this year's budget. So we're still dealing with the winter control issue from 2013, where a budget was removed, but with no change in level of services. As I just mentioned, this council a 4-year increase of $550,000 a year for storm sewer increases to our asset management plan, and some exciting news. We did have the Irigo pickleball courts added in 2021, so we just bring the maintenance into this year's budget. And there was some approvals for transmit enhancements that are mainly area rated that hit this budget as well. Both the Wallsburg on request route and a Chatham Sunday on request route. And then the next 2 slides are just giving an overview of the main items. So we actually had a change from how it's been the last few years. We actually had a couple pieces of great good news this year on the funding side from the province, with increases to the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund and a small increases to the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. These increases are a direct result of the intense lobbying that Chatham-Kent Association of Municipalities of Ontario and other municipal organizations do on our behalf, and that put us to the good start off by a 2.4 million or 1.44%. Then things that we have to look after in operations, we have our labor force. We have inflation to deal with, our previous year base budget deficit, but also to offset that, we have some good assessment growth and some revenue opportunities, and just some general base budget requirements throughout the organization that we needed, some of which has some funding attached. And then in total, we need 5.1 million for our asset management plan requirements this year. So we have a total base change requested of 10,820,000 or 6.4%. And on the next slide, we do have some one-time opportunities in provincial mitigation funding. We'll detail this more later, but and some other one-time savings. So the overall increase in the 2022 budget is just over 8 million or 4.74%. So our base budget for 2021 was 339 million. So if we add the 8 million to that, we now have a draft budget of $347 million to run all areas of our municipality. And as I previously mentioned, there are a couple of area rated items in this budget as well that are only charged to the areas that get those services. So I've mentioned the 2021 budget items impacting the 2022 budget. So it totals over 2.7 million or 1.64%. And the 2 largest items are it's great news, but public health mitigation funding and childcare in early years mitigation funding. What that really is from decisions made by this provincial government when they came into office where they were actually cutting funding to both of those areas, but mainly because of COVID and not wanting to move forward with changes, they annually have kept coming forward with one-time funding, which helps us out in that budget year, but the base costs are still there. And so this comes back over and over again. And it, as you'll find out during our deliberations, it happens again for 2022. But this sort of sets us up for the same issue as we face our 2023 budget next year. Interest rates were really challenging last year to know what direction everything was headed as interest rates dropped. And so we had some one-time interest income budget amounts. And then the police do get some funds to cover secondments, but those are announced on a year-by-year basis as well. So all those four items added up to this 1.64% need. As I mentioned, the direction that council had given us back in the spring was to cover our inflation, our asset management plan, our in lieu of divestments for our asset management plan, and the stormwater item. And just want to explain the in lieu of divestments of what that is.
Recording in progress.
When council approved the 2017 asset management plan, the actual recommendation in the report was for an increase in funding of 1.4% annually. That recommendation was altered to put a challenge to council and staff to decrease our asset base by 0.4% per year and leaving only the 1% funding. The 0.4% was to be found through a combination of both efficiencies and divestments of buildings, roads, and bridges. What we have found that for 2018 to 2021 budgets, we've just added that 1% in funding, yet only a small portion of the 0.4% savings were ever found. And as a result, this has increased our infrastructure funding gap. And so for the 2022 draft budget, we have now added that 0.4% back in to start to address that shortfall that's been created. To really break down the budget of what you see tonight, it's really an inflation and infrastructure budget where the costs come from. As we diced out the budget in a different way, inflation, between operational inflation and infrastructure inflation, really is well, around 6% tax increase needed for those before we had a couple items offset. So these are our four main pillars in our budget, and I'll detail them more in the next 4 slides. So first with inflation, I presented a detailed presentation to council at the December 6th council meeting, so I won't go too deep into this tonight. But inflation includes both fixed and variable inflation and employee contracts. We had for years been running around a 2% inflation. 2020 fell with the pandemic rate inflation, but 2021 inflation rebounded and has increased significantly. The Bank of Canada long-term inflation target remains unchanged at 2%, but I do expect high inflations in the close to 4%, continuing as they did in 2021 throughout 2022, and then tapering off in 2023 back to that Bank of Canada target value. We will be discussing employee contracts with council at our first night of deliberations, and But as you can see, inflation is our largest challenge to our budget. Infrastructure, replacing aging infrastructure and bridges, and improving our storm sewers, addressing the issue of asset divestments, improving municipal facilities, and the inflation on our infrastructure cost a significant amount in this budget. So these first two things, like I say, are close to 6% on their own. Then for our community, our future, we do have an increase in resident care at Riverview Gardens Long-Term Care Facility. And we'll hear much more about this later tonight, I'm sure, from April. But what this is a 4 hours of care announcement that has significant benefits to residents at RBG, and is mostly provincial funded, not entirely, but mostly. And we certainly appreciate the provincial funding to help us on this. We've had a really solid year of assessment growth that benefits 0.8% in this budget. And again, when we're in deliberations in a couple of weeks, we'll be explaining the impact of both our assessment policy and our community improvement plan tax deferral program, and the impact on the actual dollars that we gain and have been able to bring into the operating budget, because it may be less than what you expect given our great year of assessment growth. And as we experience growth, we need to plan for our future community needs, and that includes emergency response. And so there is community policing and outreach impacts in this budget as well. And then we have supporting our community, maintaining and delivering existing community services that are supported by Chatham-Kent residents, supporting and mitigating at-risk areas of the municipality, utilizing and maximizing available external funding sources to reduce the property tax impact, and investing in technology to enhance sustainable efficiency and reduce operational risk. The recent KPMG base budget review showcased the need to heavily invest in technology to both maintain the efficiencies that we have now, but to meet the needs of today tech-savvy residents and their desire for services more and more online. And we have the pandemic has really put a push on that, of course, with the encouragement to stay home and do things online. But this was long coming and was being prepared for. It's just being rushed to the forefront now to be implemented as much as we can in 2022 and 2023. I had mentioned the $1 million operational savings that we found. So this is part of our normal budget process where EMT constantly searches for savings. So we've found increased our property standards, administration revenue. There was a reorg and a reduction of one FTE. If you see FTE throughout the presentation, that means full-time equivalent staff member. So basically one staff member working 35 hours a week. Increase in the base interest revenue, some savings on our staff benefit plans, a change in allocation with some recommended changes to bylaw enforcement, and public health reduction of 3.1 FTE. And I want to pay special attention, given that we're in a pandemic, about that issue on the slide. The public health reduction is attached to a provincial funding freeze, and we are showing the base savings here, but we will be discussing this in much more detail when we deliberate over the next few weeks, and what our plans are to just continue to deliver the services that are needed in 2022 throughout this pandemic. So why do municipalities need to increase above inflation? You know, we support the federal and provincial governments, and all levels of governments have decisions to make. But the federal government does have the capacity, pre and post COVID, to greatly increase transfers to provincial healthcare and remove the need for downloading of costs, whether we talk about health unit and housing and childcare, funding freezes, and also for municipal infrastructure, but they've been resistant to put permanent action in place. We are, in some cases, seeing a slow in the growth of commercial activities as we move to a more digital society, placing greater costs on the residential taxpayers. Example of that, you know, there is no digital taxation on, for, you know, as some say Amazon tax, for example, as all the vehicles run up and down the roads to deliver packages from warehouses. What you're missing is that commercial property tax growth that perhaps might have been there. To be honest, property tax systems and municipal property tax does not meet the needs of today's municipalities across Canada and many jurisdictions in the world. Ideally, municipalities do need a share of some type of other revenue source, whether it's the HST or higher gas taxes or something to fund this infrastructure gap, or else it's all on the property owners in Chatham-Kent that have to foot that bill. In some cases, service levels may be greater than the demonstrated need. So that's always a council decision, and we do try to bring service reviews and recommendations to adjust those levels when we can. We still have not implemented a development charges. That of course is in the works and is coming very, very soon to council for a final decision, but it's not here yet. And just an overall comment, modernizing the revenue approaches to reflect the current trends will position municipalities to thrive as technological and economic landscapes evolve. And what I mean by that is that we all in our associations need to continue to work demonstrating the unfairness of the current municipal taxation system, and make recommendations for improvement. And we need to lobby wherever we can for somewhat of a shift from putting this all under property tax owners to at least somewhat beyond, through income taxes or a share of HST or some other source of revenue. We'll be faced with decades of 4 to 5% tax increases unless we can find another source of revenue to close that infrastructure gap. So I won't go through the fine details on this slide, but overall, all municipal operation is on an average household of valued at $174,000, has an annual impact of $51 for the municipal operations and $92 for the infrastructure renewal, for a total of the $142 or 4.74%. So before all council laugh about the average assessment value of $174,000, I need to remind you how out of date the provincial property assessment system has become. These values are the mathematical average in Chatham-Kent based on January 1st, 2016 property values. A lot of positive pressure on housing prices has happened since then. We're now a powerful magnet for both jobs as our previously empty factories refilled and repurposed themselves. Unemployment fell, housing costs skyrocketed. the GTHA, and there was a large migration of workers and residents to ideal settings such as Chatham-Kent. So the next property assessment cycle has been delayed till at least 2024 by the provincial government. And even then, we'll likely have a 4-year phase in through 2027. However, ignoring all that, back to basic principles, if all the property values were to double to reflect an average house value of 348,000 instead of 174,000, the tax rate would then be cut in half, but we'd still be left with a 2022 budget increase per household that's exactly the same as $142 that exists today. Provided that there's not a shift between different classes of properties, if all properties go up to that same value. So, don't get hung up on the $174,000 house value. That is what our average assessment really is. Our climate lens and our budget. So we do have the goal to, continually identifying opportunities to reduce energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, and enhance our resilience to climate change through our budget. And you'll see a lot of that also in our capital budget that will be delivered to council on Monday night. But as you know, the full process of council's climate change action plan is still in the development stages. And Bruce McAllister and his team has presented recently to council, and we're looking to finalize a report to council in June prior to this end of council to really get what council's priorities are and for the next term of council on where do you want to go in mitigating climate change as much as possible and where our investments should be. So I'll now turn it over to Steve to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Gord. So as Gord said, my name's Steve Brown. I'm the Director of Budget and Performance Services. So over the next several slides, I'll be taking a look at the 2021 background and tax information, as well as some of the unique challenges that face Chatham-Kent. In 2021, Chatham-Kent received slightly under $340 million in tax revenue from a variety of sources. Property taxes accounted for 51% of the revenues at just over $174 million. Of the remaining 49%, both provincial and federal grants were a significant portion, making up just under 37%. This includes such items as our Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund and the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. This is down from 38% in 2020. The remaining other revenue is comprised of such items as user fees, fines and penalties, and permit fees, to name a few. Of Chatham-Kent's overall expenses, 41.4% are employee related. This is down from 41.6% in 2020. Expenses related to infrastructure, debt, and contracted service make up a significant portion of the remaining expenses. The slide shown here is information that Chatham-Kent inserts into the final tax bill. It outlines the departmental distribution of taxes on the average residential property. Since 2010, Chatham-Kent has made significant progress in lowering its overall tax-funded debt. At the end of 2021, there was $8.8 million in tax-funded debt outstanding, made up of public housing, the convention center, and Riverview Gardens. If no new debt is issued, tax-funded debt will keep falling, and by the end of 2032, there'll be no tax-funded debt outstanding. Taking information from the BMA study that will be presented to council next Monday, the 2021 taxes on a 1,200 square foot home are $329 lower in Chatham-Kent than the average of the 114 municipalities that participate in the study. While you often hear that the tax rates in Chatham-Kent are higher than many other areas, the assessment of properties in Chatham-Kent also tend to be lower. In order to be able to collect a similar value in taxes, the tax rates need to be higher in Chatham-Kent because of this lower assessment. As noted on this slide, the tax rate is approximately 50% higher than the Ontario average. However, Chatham-Kent actually collects less tax on that same house, even taking into account this higher tax rate. And as Gord mentioned earlier, it must be noted that the average assessment is based on the January 1st, 2016 assessment date. And assessment values won't be updated by MPAC until at least 2024. Assessment values should not be confused with current sales value, as taxes are based on assessed value and not sale price. Based on the 2021 BMA study, when comparing a single family detached home, the taxes paid in Chatham-Kent are below both the survey and the group average for a similar house in other municipalities. When comparing both taxes and water and wastewater costs, Chatham-Kent is below both the group and the survey average. Chatham-Kent has one of the lowest cost of services in the survey of 114 municipalities. Chatham-Kent's large size and geography presents numerous challenges to the municipality and its overall budget. This slide highlights many of the areas where Chatham-Kent is unique and the reason why it is difficult to often compare us to other municipalities. While Chatham-Kent only has 0.7% of the Ontario population, we have over 20% of the municipal drains and over 5% of the bridges in Ontario. With only 43 people per square kilometer to pay for all of that infrastructure and services, there are also significantly less people to pay for those same services versus places like Windsor and Sarnia. Because of our large geography, we must also maintain and staff 10 arenas, 11 libraries, and 11 public works garages. This slide provides a breakout of the average residential assessment and taxes broken out between our pre-amalgamated communities. Erio and Harwich have the highest average assessment at over 240,000, with the City of Chatham having an average residential assessment of around 165,000. The average farm assessment and taxes broken out by ward is highlighted within the chart on the top. As you will note, farms in and around Ward 6, which is Chatham, are assessed higher on average, with Ward 4, North Kent, having the second highest farm assessment and taxes. The chart on the bottom highlights the impacts of a 1% budget increase on commercial and industrial properties, which equates to a tax increase of $94 and $96 respectively. It should be noted that in 2021, there was a permanent reduction in the provincial education rate, and over 90% of the commercial and industrial properties in Chatham-Kent saw a reduction in their 2021 tax bill, even after taking into account the 2.4% municipal budget increase. The largest proportion of property taxes collected within Chatham-Kent come from residential properties, at 63% of the total property taxes collected. This is followed by commercial at 17% and farm at 10%. The proportion of property taxes collected between property classes remains unchanged from 2020. While I understand this slide is pretty busy and maybe difficult to read, it highlights the amount of taxes collected by property class for each of the pre-amalgamated communities. Nearly 40% of all the property taxes collected in Chatham-Kent are collected within the City of Chatham, followed by Harwich Township with 8%. So what is the difference between budget setting and tax policy? The budget process determines the overall financial requirements of the municipality, while tax policy determines which property class will pay what share of the overall financial requirements. Tax policy is presented to Council in April and provides recommendations on tax ratio changes, which in turn may shift a proportion of the tax burden from one class to another. Tax policy also takes announcements from the province, such as education rates, and new legislation, such as tax ratio limits, in determining how much of the total tax requirements each property class will pay. In addition to the tax levy discussed tonight, there are also local improvement levies that are charged to some properties for works completed, such as drainage and water and wastewater works. Some areas also have additional area rating for services that are provided to a specific area, but not all of Chatham-Kent, such as transit and full-time fire. In late 2021, the funding envelope was announced for the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. Based on the changes made by the provincial government to the funding formula, in 2022, Chatham-Kent will receive an additional $322,000. Even when taking into account the increase in funding for 2022, over the last 4 budget years, our OMPF has been reduced by nearly $840,000, which has been transferred onto the property taxpayers of Chatham-Kent. In 2021, not unlike 2019 and 2020, Chatham-Kent had above average assessment growth that can be primarily attributed to the increase in residential building permits. It is expected that our assessment growth will continue to show strength due to the ongoing residential building permits, but that this may be offset by the new Community Improvement Plan property tax grants that Council approved in 2020 for new commercial, industrial, and multi-residential properties. I'll now turn it back over to Gord, who will be talking about infrastructure and staffing.
Thank you, Steve. So back talking about our asset management plan, it was a 20-year plan in 2017, but it does get updated every 5 years, which I mentioned we're updating shortly. 1%. We've already talked about the 0.4%. That was to be found through divestment and efficiencies. But the large issue really has been the inflation values since 2017. It's been far higher than the inflation estimates used in that plan. We've actually averaged 5.3% inflation on our cost of, think of how much for resurfacing a kilometer of roadway or replacing a bridge. They've gone up 5.3% every year on average over that 5-year period, even though core inflation was targeted to be only at 2% a year. Next slide, please. So just again, this slide just breaks down the 2.6 million budget ask between those categories. The Canada Community Building Fund is it used to be called federal gas tax. They've renamed the fund because as gas is being phased out over the next few decades, and so we have $2.6 million recommendations plus another $2.5 million of inflation in this year's budget. So overall, we have approximately $5.2 million of the $8 million increase in this budget is directly related to our infrastructure. On the next slide, this is just a breakdown of our major categories of infrastructure. And as you can see, road networks, bridges and culverts, and storm sewers make up about close to 3/4 of our assets, of the infrastructure that we need to maintain. And with the high inflation that we had, it really has changed our needs. So the 2017 plan and the breakdown on this pie chart was based on $95 million of total needs, and as Don's mentioned, we're around $55 million funded. But our preliminary data, and this will be delivered to councils in the spring this year, our preliminary data is actually showing that we do need an annual investment now of around $118 million a year. So a 23% increase since 2017. So we're really not catching up. In fact, the infrastructure gap has widened, and that is a large concern. Thomas Colley, a GM of Infrastructure and Engineering, will be also touching on to this a little bit later in this evening's presentation. On this slide, we're demonstrating the top 5 underfunded categories, but to be clear, we've done a lot of work over the last 2 councils, since about 2013, on funding the bridge category. Our main problems are our paved road networks and our storm network. Those are just historically very underfunded, the storm network particularly, and as climate change happens and the velocity of storms increases, it's showing. And paved roads are only approximately 50% funded, and so we have a lot of work to do. Won't repeat all this. I've already mentioned everything on the slide, but we will be coming with a very detailed analysis of our needs in the next few months to council. With development charges, we're moving along. COVID did really impact the development charges, this project timeline, and specifically when it altered our growth projection profiles that had to be refreshed. And you remember our consultant Watson coming to council with that updated information just a couple months ago. We are on track to having the issue come to council in the spring and to get development charges implemented by the second half of 2022, so we can begin having growth pay for growth items and have our operating budget have some relief with our capital budget needs moving forward when growth pays for growth. Our estimated reserve balance at the end of 2021 is approximately 190 million, with 1.7 million being used in this year's budget. Reserves are put aside for specific purposes by council, and we include a document detailing the balance of every reserve in section 9D of our budget package. Our reserves are in line with the average reserve levels of municipalities of our size in Ontario. And this has been a huge achievement by council since 1998, when our reserves basically were not in existence and severely underfunded. So we've now finally gotten to a proper level of reserves. And reserves help us remain a sustainable and resilient municipality. So whenever emergency events come up, as seem to be happening quite regularly recently, we're able to face those challenges. Next couple slides, I'm discussing our staffing recommendations, and when you see FTE, that's full-time equivalent positions, meaning the people that would work 35 hours a week. So you could perhaps have 2 part-time individuals working jointly that 35 hours. So that's why we put everything back into FTEs. So we have some very important key staffing recommendations this year. We have 29.5 FTE for the 4 hours of care RVG. That also requires a manager of long-term care there as well. We have a housing claims analyst. We have police services. When they make their presentation, they'll be Chief Khan will be detailing the need for 4 police cadets, and we have needing an additional staff member in our housing services maintenance division, as our housing assets are getting older and are we're finding that much more frequent needs of repair. And in supporting our community, we have 2 FTE in our electronic records and management area. A report came to council a few months ago on that. With our strong uptake in building permits, we have the need for 2 more building inspectors / bylaw enforcement officers. And we have a need for 1 FTE to manage our human resources information system. So and if you add those up, that's 41.5 FTE of permanent based jobs in our budget. However, I do want to indicate as part of that savings that was found, we do have reductions in 4.2 FTE eliminated in this proposed budget as well. I just can't emphasize enough that these are essential positions supported by the entire executive management team, and I encourage council to dig into the briefing notes and understand how each of these positions relate to your strategic directions that you've asked staff to deliver. The next slide just summarizes that. So the net new staffing base request is just for over 37 full-time equivalents, with a tax impact of $678,000, or about 0.4%. So as you can see, the vast majority of these positions do have other sources of funding and did not require tax dollars, particularly in the RBG area. And Section 9E of our budget package outlines every single job in detail and the cost involved. Down below in the one-time funded area, we have our more routine project level positions, where we have close to 41 FTE and entirely funded from reserves and lifecycle reserves or other sources of revenue. So there is no tax impact to that. This happens every year as we hire specific skill sets that we need to implement specific projects and keep our base staffing levels as low as we can. Back to Steve to finish the last few slides.
Thanks, Gord. So the future year's tax impact provides a conservative projection of what Chatham-Kent is estimating for budget increases over the next 5 years. With projecting out 5 years, there are always going to be many unknowns, such as changes of provincial and federal funding, and also COVID-19, which has impacted both our 2021 financial position and, to some extent, our 2022 budget. As we move into the development of the multi-year budgets in 2024, we will also be looking to start building a rate stabilization reserve to mitigate any significant events in the future. So with that said, we're currently projecting over the next 5 years, we'll be looking at a 4% tax increase annually. Available tonight on our website will be the 2022 draft budget overview, along with information pertaining to our online open houses. Residents are also encouraged to visit CK Let's Talk budget page to provide feedback and ask questions. The Police Service Board is currently finalizing information and will be providing a presentation on Thursday, January 27th, and we will have a closed presentation on labor relations on Wednesday, January the 26th. Due to COVID-19, we made the decision to continue our public consultation process for the 2022 budget online. We have scheduled 2 Facebook Live events on Wednesday, January 19th at noon and Thursday, January 20th at 7 p.m. We have scheduled these events at different times to provide CK residents with an opportunity to not only learn about the budget, but to comment on it and have their voices heard. Council deliberations on the 2022 budget start the following week on Wednesday, January the 26th at 6 p.m. Written deputations can be submitted each night for the Budget Committee deliberations up to 3 p.m. each day and can be sent to ckfps@chatham-kent.ca. Tonight, we've received one request for a deputation from the Chatham-Kent Health Alliance. So I'll now turn it over to Lori Marshall, Alan Stevenson, and Mary Lou Colley from Chatham-Kent Health Alliance.
Thank you, Steve. And I'll ask perhaps that you could just pull up the slides for us. Thank you. It's a pleasure for Alan and Mary Lou and I to be here with you this evening as you deliberate and make really important decisions about services for our community. And so first of all, I thank you for your dedication to that. What we'd like to do this evening is really present what we think is an opportunity for not only the municipalities' priorities to come to the forefront, but also really the synergies with respect to how those also blend and meld with the priorities of Chatham-Kent Health Alliance. What you see here before you on the slide is our vision, mission, and values. And what I really want to draw to your attention is that vision of together growing a healthier community. In our previous strategic plan, one of the major areas that we identified as a gap at that point was urology services. And I think all of us are so pleased to say and to be able to demonstrate and show that we were able to close that particular gap. As that strategic plan came to a close and we were starting to move ahead into our new strategic plan, one of the things that certainly came out loud and clear for us in that plan and with the feedback we were receiving from the community was the gaps that we have in Chatham-Kent with respect to addiction services and in particular residential withdrawal management. And an opportunity for us to apply for some services to Ontario Health has arisen. We are pursuing that particular opportunity, and that is primarily for operating funding. What we're here this evening to chat with you about is really looking towards the municipality to support us and help us with the renovations that we would be required in order for us on a one-time basis to put in place truly a service that will serve our community for years to come. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Alan Stevenson, who is really our resident expert in all things related to mental health and addictions, both at the CMHA and also because he serves as a vice president at Chatham-Kent Health Alliance. So Alan, over to you, please.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks council members and staff, as well as citizens of Chatham-Kent for the opportunity to join you and speak to you tonight. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what residential withdrawal management is and why it's necessary. Residential withdrawal management really is a service that is designed to assist people who are in the stages of withdrawal from alcohol or drugs, including opioids, which, as I think everyone knows, is a significant challenge, not just in Chatham-Kent, but throughout Canada and North America. Residential withdrawal management creates a safe environment for people to experience withdrawal with supports, including both medical and non-medical supports, as well as to begin the process of moving forward with addiction treatment. We have developed a plan, and we're, as Lori said, anticipating support from Ontario Health that is evidence-based, that uses the latest knowledge and technologies with respect to withdrawal management and the initiation of addictions treatment. And we have the resources in place to provide with our partners and certainly within our own resources at CKHA, good continuity of care to enable people to access ongoing addiction services and mental health supports post withdrawal period. What we have proposed is a 10-bed residential program with access to outpatient services as well for people who choose to withdraw at home, but a 10-bed residential program that would be located in what is known to CKHA as Zone F. And for those of you who know it, that is formerly the site of outpatient mental health and addiction services, and currently has served as offices for administrative supports, including finance and human resources. The space was never designed for residential purposes, and so there are some renovations that are required. I want to reiterate and reinforce, though, that the ongoing operating cost for this is not something we're asking CK Municipality for. Rather, we're working with Ontario Health and look forward to approval at some point on that. Can I have the next slide, please? Steve. So why is it important? Well, I mentioned already the target population. We are the only community in Southwestern Ontario that does not have their own residential withdrawal management. It has consistently come up both through the work of community organizations like the United Way, as well as through our strategic planning process here at CKHA. As one of the most significant needs, certainly in terms of gaps in services for addictions and mental health in our community. We know that we send a significant number of people out of community to receive withdrawal management, which is working okay for those folks, but we know that the greater number of people decline those referrals because of proximity. The need for resources locally is very evident, and we've certainly seen that in our partnership and collaboration, particularly through COVID with the municipality in responding to people suffering from addictions while at the temporary homelessness shelter and in community. We know as well that that this is an important piece of taking some of the pressures off CKHA in terms of our inpatient capacity, as many of those folks that are in withdrawal are admitted to inpatient units, and not appropriately so. They ought not to be in that milieu. They ought to be in a dedicated residential withdrawal management service instead. Have the next slide, Steve. So I guess I'm in some ways preaching to the converted, because you've already identified this in your own plan. In the CKH, sorry, I'm used to saying CKHA now. It's part of my language. In the Municipality of Chatham-Kent's Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, you specifically identified the objective of mental health and substance use services. People can access local mental health and substance use support services, including specifically calling out withdrawal management. So it does align already to what you have as a municipality in collaboration with and through consultation with residents and service providers alike identified as a need for the community. And so the challenge that we have is that in the event, on the contingency that we are successful in our bid to receive operating funding, we are not going to be receiving any of the capital costs we know from Ontario Health. And so the cost, as I mentioned, to renovate Zone F, that is not designed for a residential purpose, is fairly substantial. We're currently estimating those costs at $1.2 million. And we'd like to ask the municipality to make a contribution as a partner as we continue to work through our own fundraising efforts, along with the foundation. And as Lori said, Mary Lou Crowley is here as well as a key partner as we develop our plans for fundraising. We would like to ask the Municipality of Chatham-Kent to make a contribution, a significant contribution of $500,000 towards this project. And again, I'd like to stress that it is contingent upon us receiving the ongoing operating funding, and that it is a one-time request. We are not asking for ongoing costs or ongoing commitments just this one time. With that, I'd like to say thank you for your consideration. Lori?
And so I too will add my thanks. I know that Mary Lou had hoped to contribute, but I think she's on mute on the phone. So I promised that I would indicate for her the support of the foundation as one of the other partners that will help to contribute and work towards this particular outcome for us as a community. And we'll also be looking for other opportunities to support it. So I'll also reiterate again, as Ellen said, this is a one-time ask that would allow us to then really create a program that will be something that will serve our community, the residents of Chatham-Kent, and really fill in a gap that we know exists for all of us. And so with that, if there is an opportunity to answer questions, we would be happy to do so.
Thanks. Brock, I'm not sure if would you like us to continue? What we have is each of our general managers now just have a couple minute presentation, and then we will turn it back to you for questions, and we can include the Health Alliance if there's questions for them then, or we could do their questions now. What would you like?
I think perhaps we should do their questions now, respecting there could be some other commitments tonight, and we're not sure how people get into questions after those EMT presentations. So I saw a few hands pop up. I think it's Councillor Crew. Did you have a question?
Yes, I'm kind of wondering where and how we would fit this request in for us to deliberate this as part of our budget. Mr. Chair, do you have any idea how this would work? Because I'm certainly willing to put it forward because it wasn't only identified in the community safety and well-being plan, it's been identified across the community for many years, but the crisis has become, it's at our doorstep and we need to address it. So do you have any suggestions on how we move forward with getting this ask into our budget deliberations?
Yeah, so we're not taking any motions tonight in particular, but it is something that we can include in budget deliberations, just like any other item. So I'll maybe ask Gord how we've dealt with that in the past. I know we've had some similar requests in previous budgets, and what night do we typically deal with those, and do they require a motion from the floor, or was there some staff information that can be brought forward?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is exactly how we would like community groups to come forward. If there's a large request from our budget, is that it's presented tonight, and then we will take motions from council when we begin deliberations in 2 weeks, and I'm sure April Rydick will also perhaps have some suggestions of where this funding could come from if a council did wish to proceed at that point in time.
Great, thanks, Gord. Did that answer your question, Marjorie? Councilor
Yeah, it does. And so I guess can I take the liberty of working with Gord and April to get this drafted and brought forward at the appropriate time?
Yep, I'll make sure you're the name written down to call on when it's time for it. All
right, good. I just want to make sure it gets there. One question for Alan or Lori. So does the one-time contribution of $500,000, does that need to be all at once? Is that can we say 250 per year, or is it when and if you get the money, you need the whole amount right away, just for how we would budget it?
I can respond, Lori. This is this contribution is towards renovations, and in order for us to operationalize, we need to renovate the space before we can fully implement. We do have a plan to implement a temporary version without the full capacity, without the full 10 beds. But in order to implement the full 10 beds, we need to do the fairly comprehensive renovation. So to answer your question, in fact, we're looking for it as a single contribution.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Thanks, Brock, or Councillor McGregor.
Councillor Latimer.
Thank you to the budget chair. I thank Councillor Crew because she took the questions right out of my mouth. I'm to take it, Alan, that the timeline that you're expecting to hear back from Ontario Health is soon, and so that you want to proceed with this project. I know immediately. Is that correct? What is soon? when do you expect the timeline would be when you'd hear about your funding?
I'm going to ask Lori to respond to that.
I think we'll ask you to respond to that. We are very hopeful that we will hear from Ontario Health before the end of this fiscal year. So our fiscal year ends March 31st. So we would anticipate that we will hear before that stage. And at the point when we do hear, then we will want to move very quickly towards the renovations. Because I think we all want this up and going as soon as we possibly can.
Agreed. So so you spoke about some interim capacity that you could start the program before you got the renovations done. So when would you anticipate that the community or that your community partners could begin referring to this program if you get your funding by the end of this fiscal year and you have your money pretty well in pocket for the renovations? When would you think we could start to refer?
So I'll take a crack at that one, Lori. Thank you for the question, Councillor Latimer. I appreciate your enthusiasm and your interest. Our plans would enable us to begin taking referrals before the end of the fiscal year. It is contingent upon, though, adequate lead time, when we get a yes or no answer from Ontario Health. But if it is as soon as we were hoping, then we anticipate being able to operationalize a few beds prior to the end of the fiscal year, which again is March 31st for us.
That is music to all of our ears. Thank you. And what do you mean by capacity for your outpatient? I'm a community occupational therapist, so I'm thrilled to hear this presentation and this plan for our community. So, 10 beds is a lot fiscally, but it's not a lot in relevance to the problem we see.
That's right.
So I expect that your outpatient or your at-home program would be quite a lot larger than your actual 10 beds. So could you give the community an idea about how many or what would be the numbers, number of people involved in your program initially, and what you hope to grow that to through the first year?
For the outpatient program, I'm afraid I'm not able to answer that question. The funding request that we responded to specifically is only for residential programming. However, we have within our this will create an opportunity for us to create some synergies with our rapid addiction assessment medicine program is a RAM program as well. And so by aligning those two programs the way we envision, we will actually be able to leverage more of our capacity so that we can serve more outpatients. When I say that, our initial implementation priority is to ensure we get the residential program up and running and do it right. But that will begin to free up some resources so we can support more people in their own homes to withdraw successfully. So to answer your question in terms of numbers or volumes, we're not at that stage yet.
Thank you very much again for the presentation. And this is very encouraging to hear tonight. So thank you again.
Appreciate your support.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Chairman McGregor. Just a question, probably not one you want to hear, but healthcare is primarily a provincial jurisdiction and is funded primarily by the province. So I'm just curious, and again, I glitch out, my intranet is not great, so maybe I've missed the answer to this question, so I apologize in advance for that. But coming to the municipality for this funding, like I can understand municipal fundraising efforts, and I get that, and I see it all the time, and that's fine. But wouldn't this and isn't this a provincial responsibility, similarly to schools, like education, which is again, a provincial portfolio. So why come to the municipality? And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just, asking on behalf of people that are probably thinking the same thing I am. Maybe I'm the only one. I don't know, but that's my question. Like, healthcare is provincial. We all pay lots of taxes provincially, federally, municipally. So why come to us? Why not go to the province and do our friend Mr. Ford?
Alan, maybe I'll address this one. So thanks. And absolutely, the ongoing operating costs of this program are funded by the province and will be. It's very common that capital costs are not funded by the province. So, when we think about, for example, the Wallaceburg renewal of that particular site, the capital costs very much are the responsibility of the organization, and that there has to be a local contribution to it. And that includes not only renovations, but also equipment and those sorts of things. We would anticipate there will be a small contribution that would come with some one-time funding if we're successful in our proposal. But we do know that the vast majority of the capital costs would sit with us, as it would in every other municipality where these programs might be approved.
Okay, and thank you through Chairman McGregor to Ms. Marshall. So the capital cost is the responsibility of the organization, which would be the Chatham-Kent Health Alliance, which is funded primarily and solely through the province, I would think, and through private donation. So is it, and I think maybe you just said this, so I apologize. Is it common for municipalities to contribute to capital costs, which is capital costs really just means like giving money, right? So is it a common occurrence for, say, the city of Toronto or the city of Pickle Lake to contribute to healthcare, which is again primarily a provincial domain? Is this a common occurrence?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it is. It's very common, particularly with large capital campaigns, that there are things like plebiscites that come through municipalities looking to, in those cases, they're often very significant asks that then can be a multi-year contribution on behalf of the municipality. So this is a common practice. I will say that in the 5 years that I've been CEO, we have not come to the municipality, and we've been saving up for when we believe that we would need this particular support. So definitely, as we mentioned, Mary Lou Crowley is here from the foundation. We will be looking for other opportunities and ways to fundraise for this. And we believe that because this aligns so closely with the municipality's priorities and municipality's plans about how to move forward, that were the municipality to try and do this on its own without the support coming through from the Ministry of Health and that funding, the costs would be much greater for us as taxpayers to mount this kind of program without that. And so while definitely I certainly appreciate your comments there, I think that for $500,000, this actually would be a bargain for the municipality of Chatham-Kent.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, and again, just one quick question. If the municipality council does, offer and approve a $500,000 grant, does this have any impact on on provincial funding? Do they look at this as, hey, we've got an agreeable municipality that's helping? So when you do, in fact, go back to the province, of course, for the majority of all your funding, if the municipality of Chatham-Kent does approve this $500,000, does that help you in your application for funding from the province, in that you have a municipality which is playing ball, to put it in a kind of layman's sort of terms?
Thank you for that question through Mr. Chair. I would say yes. not explicitly. So it is not a requirement of the proposal that we list the partners. However, anytime I would say healthcare providers apply for things, the fact that we have such a wonderful partnership already between the CMHA, Lambton Kent, as well as CKHA around these particular areas, we know that that creates a strong partnership. And so then by being able to add in really the contribution and the support of the municipality and the recognition of this being such an important priority, as well as the foundation, we think we actually have a very strong proposal that can go forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Marshall. Thank you.
Councillor Carmen McGregor.
Thank you, and through the chair. I'd like to thank Lori and team for the presentation tonight. It makes a great deal of sense to me. I think that with that ask, we would definitely see that money come back through in savings in the community and through our tax dollars. We often hear and have reports from social services, from our health department, from our police department, on all of the extra work that is going out in helping in a social manner, and often that is dealing with addiction. So I'm glad that you've brought this in-depth presentation, and I look forward to further discussion with the budget committee going forward on this. So thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Chair McGregor. Can you speak a little bit, Lori, to the need? As Councillor Bondi pointed out, I mean, funding this sort of thing, or healthcare is a provincial issue by and large. So regionally, are there other treatment centers in the region, and what is their capacity like, and what is, just in general, the need in the community, I suppose, is my question.
Thank you. And I will speak at a very high level, and then I'm going to ask Alan to speak a little bit more specifically about the need. In fact, Chatham-Kent is the only area in really the west region, west of London, that does not have these services. They are available in London, they are available in Sarnia, they are available in Windsor. And so right now, individuals who require this kind of service are required to travel to one of those jurisdictions for that care. And I think we would say that more often than not, when faced with that choice, will choose not to travel and therefore not to receive those services. But I think Alan could maybe speak just a little bit more to the community need.
So just thanks, Lori. And further to that, just the way we access withdrawal management services in other communities is on a first come, first served basis. And so in the event that one of our patients does agree to go to residential withdrawal management, be it in Sarnia, Windsor, or London, the bed, if available, and oftentimes those programs are at in excess of 110% capacity. So with wait times, when a bed does become available, they're given, generally speaking, less than 4 hours to occupy the bed. If they are not able to get to the bed in time, somebody else is given the bed. And so it's essentially a non-service, frankly, to the majority of people who require that level of care. And when you layer on some of the complexities that many of the people that we're speaking with, not all, but many, that are dealing with poverty, homelessness, potentially mental health issues as well, that those kinds of barriers become just overwhelming and insurmountable. So it really is not an option for those folks. In terms of the demand, we have projected that we would be in a position to easily fill, to be running at 100% capacity within 6 months of operation. So 10 beds full all the time. Average length of stay is about only 5 days. And so when you think about 10 beds 365 days a year with a turnover every 5 days, it's a fairly significant number of people that we're anticipating serving. And again, you know, one of the, well, I don't want to go into too much detail about addictions. One of the likely scenarios is that people will actually enter withdrawal management multiple times before they are successful in their recovery journey. And so we are talking in some cases about people reaccessing services, but the options, if that doesn't happen, are much more costly in terms of the homelessness system, the policing and incarceration system, as well as the medical costs of treating people who are actively involved in substance use. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I did my best.
All that and so much more. Thank you very much.
Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is through you to Mr. Quinton. And it's on this and what I suspect will be some other requests from other groups. Mr. Quinton, we've been provided with, and the public listening, we've been provided with a binder that has, it's a rather thick one, and it has 11 tabs in it. And at tab B, which I don't know that we've got to yet, 1B that is, it is called Ranking Criteria and Council Term Priorities. And what I understand after I don't know how many budgets is using this system is that municipal staff, in preparing all the budgets and considering all requests from different departments, they then sit down and rank the requests with a mind to how much money we have coming in from our limited property tax that you spent, I don't know, 15 minutes ago telling us we didn't have enough of and that we needed to find other sources of revenue from perhaps HST and other areas. So are you going to, I would think good budgeting would require you to also rank all requests that we have from external sources. So this is the first one that we've got, because this is the first hour and a half of our budget. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's others that come along as we proceed. I would think that it's good budgeting to do an analysis of the request and provide a ranking with respect to other projects that we've got on the books here. Tell me that you're going to do that, because if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in our budgeting process. It's no comment whether good or bad, whether this is a great idea or not a great idea, or whether it's a superlative idea. It's merely, I just want to keep us on track with good budgeting practice, because obviously some things that are on here might have to move off in order to come up with a $500,000. And I know somebody's going to simply say, pull it out of reserves. That's not particularly good budgeting either. So, Mr. Quinn, tell me, you've got time to be able to analyze this and rank it. Is that the process you're going to follow, or are we simply going to have a motion based on what I heard someone say, enthusiasm and interest? Because I know there's other people who are enthusiastic about other programs too.
Thank you,
So
Mr.
that's
Chair.
my
And
question.
thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Solomon, for the question. Yes, that's absolutely the process. This is a very fresh request. We were notified just recently of that this request is coming. We wanted you to hear the deputation tonight and hear the details. We will be coming to council with this. This was not included in the binder because it came after EMT deliberated. So this will be coming as a new line. You'll hear from staff with our recommendations and potential reserves, as you just said, to fund a one-time issue. And then it will be ultimately up to council of where they want to go. But this will be part of our deliberations that begin 2 weeks from tonight.
Well, thank you,
As
Mr.
new
Chairman. That
information.
I've got dogs that are going nuts, but other than that, that's what I wanted to hear, is that there was going to be some analysis, that it's not going to be just someone put up their hand and say, let's go for it. It'll be after, if there is a motion like that, it'll be after some careful analysis by administration. And it was a good presentation, but I always like to get the analysis. You've done so much work on others. I would think you'd want to treat everybody in a fair and equal manner. Thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised for questions. So again, want to thank Alan and Lori for the presentation. And we've heard from Gord and others that we'll be receiving some more information as we move into budget deliberations on this item, so we can continue the debate at that point and decide on a course of action. But again, thank you for the presentation this evening. And I'll pass it back to, I believe, Gord to continue through the EMT presentations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We now have each general manager just speaking for a couple minutes to highlight some of the things that are happening in their area with this budget. So first up, we have Thomas Colley.
Hello, good evening, Council, and good evening, public. So within the budget, I've just highlighted some of the major points of the budget that we've included for the Infrastructure and Engineering Services Group. First is one of the priorities that Don mentioned was growth and the ability to improve our public transit. And we have really 4 aspects of our driving forward strategy. This was the strategy developed by Ian Clark that he's presented several times to council. The first is an increase of service level within Wallaceburg. This is using the on request service, and to have that available for 7 days. Currently, Wallaceburg does not have a transit service with the exception of accessible. The second was with Chatham, that we would have an on request service for Sunday available as well. So both of those are both increases in services. The third is our ability to try to move toward a user pay service of at least 25% of this investment. And with that, we're recommending some transit fare increases averaging 1.6% over the next 5 years, and also simplifying some of the fare structure. Lastly, to manage all of these new services that we're putting in place, we're asking for an increase in full-time equivalent staff from 0.4 to 1 full-time person. So that's the first item, which is our driving forward strategy. The second one is year 2 of 4. You may recall that way back in 2013, there was a motion to cut our SALT budget by 500,000. We've been trying to build that back up. Every year we're running essentially over budget on this particular ad. And we were running at 125,000 per year. We did that for 2 years. Last year, there was a cut made that we would amortize the increase over 4 years and essentially cut it in half. So that's the 62,500 that we approved from last year. We're just carrying that over, and we need to maintain that at least out to 2024. Number 3 is the addition of 1 building maintenance person. Gord mentioned that our buildings are getting older when it comes to our public housing. And we're actually seeing an increase over the last 3 years, a 15% increase in the number of services requests. So overall, we have 706 housing units that we maintain within the municipality. And currently that's all managed by 5 staff. So if you look at that, that's 141 units per staff member. And of course, we have vacation, we have sicknesses and so on. So they're always trying to cover for each other at the same time. So what we're asking for is 1 additional more that would be stationed in Wallaceburg. Right now, Wallaceburg, actually of that 706, they have about 40% of the available housing for the public. And so that we're looking at really going from 5 to 6 people. And even then, each person would still have to manage on average 117 units. So it's a very taxing role, and we're just really trying to maintain the service that we provided in the past for all of our residents of public housing. Number 4 is the maintenance of our municipal buildings, parks, and open spaces. You may recall a motion that council approved last year, that the good news was from COVID is that all of our parks, our open spaces, and our trails are getting used a lot more. This is the majority of the ask that we have here. And we're asking really to maintain that service that we had from last year. This is a 1-year ask. We're going to see how things look at the end of this year. Hopefully we're going to be through COVID. We have a purchase of a chipper for Public Works. This is in the Raleigh garage. This is essentially to level up the service so that each one of our garages have a chipper, and that's used for recycling. It supports our environment, of course. Right now, that particular group is constantly trying to share and borrow from other garages. It's just not very efficient. A couple of items that we put on hold for now is the investment of a 3-ton dump truck for the Kent Center garage, and also the 6-ton snow plow was also put on hold for Chatham. And both of those, you can imagine with the Kent Center garage, all of the demands we've had, especially for Erie Shore Drive and the issues we have out at the lake. This is a vehicle that's extremely expensive, by the way, but it would help us with all of our transportation of gravel, asphalt, and also in the wintertime, it uses a snowplow. The same goes for the 6-ton snowplow within Chatham. So year over year, I've done a study, and we actually, with all of our new subdivisions, every year we're increasing the overall size of our infrastructure that we're maintaining. But within the Public Works group, we haven't added any staff since I've been here for 9 years. And we're still maintaining our same amount of equipment. So we're really on that verge of having to add another vehicle. One of the other challenges that we have, and council have that as well, is that we currently meet the minimum maintenance standard, and that's a standard established by the province. We follow that and we meet that, but the service level from the province and the minimum standard from the province doesn't always align with what the public is expecting. And our priorities for winter control are always the arterials, the busiest roads, followed by the collectors, followed by the local roads. And it's the local roads in particular that a number of residents, we receive a number of complaints every single year that we're not out there fast enough plowing the local roads. And it is a challenge for us. We put these on hold for now. It's up to debate for council, but we think we can still maintain minimum maintenance standard, but we're going to have to communicate again to the public that minimum maintenance standard doesn't always translate into what the public wants. Lastly, we had I think a very creative idea on our airport management. We had the contract increase because we had the contract ended. So that is in the budget, but we looked at a model called Fly GTA, and this is a commercial service that many other airports offer. Right now, we don't have any commercial service out of our Chatham-Kent airport. It would fly to 8 different destinations, being Toronto, Niagara, Muskoka, and so on. And it's a service that we would have to fund for 3 years. But in return, what that does for you is it makes the airport eligible for the airport's capital assistance program. And many airports have adopted this philosophy of Fly GTA and been a participant in the capital program. And they've done so, not only have they increased the service of their airport and convenience for businesses and residents, but they've also actually recovered the funding through capital. So it's been quite a success story at other airports within Ontario. We have also put that on hold, and the reason really was driven by COVID. COVID, we're not seeing near the amount of usage that we used to, and we think it's highly risky to even consider the service with the current situation that we're in with the pandemic. I also, just in closing, wanted to mention a couple of good pieces of news that are extremely hot off the press. And you may be seeing some activity from these in the budget, potential deputations. The first is with regard to, Councillor Bondi mentioned this in a meeting about putting a dome on the John McGregor tennis courts called the Doug Allen courts. We have been working with a local group headed up by Stephanie Evans and made the application with her. Really, she was driving it. We were supporting her. through Tennis Canada, they just received notice that received $200,000 toward this investment. So we're working with them right now to figure out develop a cost sharing plan that we want to bring back to council that would include not only Chatham-Kent Municipal, but also the school board, St. Clair College, and private donations as well. And the other good piece of news is on the pickleball application. You recall we came to council with a report asking to make an application. It required some upfront investment from Chatham-Kent. There would be also some ongoing operational costs, but we've received notice today that we've received up to $430,000 from the province. Our portion needs to be about $116,000. We're just getting into the details now, and we will be coming back to council if some of that is going to be applicable in this particular year. So that's everything from my group. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Thomas. I know you've all heard from me enough, but how that got shuffled, I'm up next. So I'm also the general manager of finance, budget, information technology, and transformation. The first two items, long-term sustainable financial planning and open, transparent budget processes. We are, with council's approval, we are moving very quickly towards our 2024 to 2027 multi-year budget process. And we also continue to do a 5 and 10 year capital plan with engineering. And in preparation for that, we will be using a new software package for the 2023 budget. So we'll have a new look and hopefully a much more readable document, and really keys into the greater transparency on where your tax dollars are going. Investment in citizen-centric approaches to delivery services. There are a number of numerous projects in the budget that continue to refresh outdated software, invest in how the citizens interact with us for services. So some examples, a very important one is Next Generation 911, which council will be receiving a presentation and a report at the January 17th council meeting. But we also have many of our current systems that are at their end of the life and needing upgraded. So we have a City View upgrade for online permits, licensing, and dog tags, Skype replacement that I think many will be happy to see, Microsoft 365, work from home connectivity improvements, and assisting with many major upgrades across the organization, including investigating in the future technology needs of RVG, our long-term care home. And then efficiencies in network infrastructure and business system upgrades. We have many projects on the go. Particularly, we have some about getting better internet services to our more rural locations to better help our staff deliver the services more efficiency at those locations. And also, with the benefit of COVID is that everything has moved a lot quicker lately as we push ahead and we really see the use of technology as the key to efficiency with our business processes in the future. And if they don't have the technology in their workplace, it really can slow down the productivity of staff. So that's the highlights of where we come through in our budget. I think I'm turning it over to Bruce.
Thank you, Budget Chair and members of Council. Bruce McAllister, General Manager of Community Development. I'll just hit a few highlights in the Community Development budget as well here. So Council will recall just last month in early December, we provided Council with an update on Chatham-Kent's growth strategy and some preliminary growth forecast. The purpose of that report was to provide Council and the public with a general summary on some of the key priority initiatives that have already been put into place, those that are currently in progress, and some proposed future initiatives to continue to support the growth strategy. It also contained new preliminary growth forecasts. Gord mentioned this earlier in his presentation, which are now projecting certainly more bullish growth than where we were just 2 years ago, especially over the next 10 years. In support of the growth strategy, as part of last year's budget, administration recommended the creation of a growth plan reserve to be phased in at $100,000 per year over the next 3-year period. In the 2021 budget, Council approved the initial $100,000 of tax funding, and an additional $100,000 is included in this year's budget for year 2. Among other things, this funding is necessary to support some of the key land use planning and servicing strategies in various targeted growth areas, such as the Southwest Chatham, Southside Walsburg, and South Wheatley studies that are all currently either underway or about to get started. And certainly there'll be future planning work necessary in 2022 and 2023 as well. So in addition to this, at the same meeting in December, Council received a report and approved a recommendation to consider 2 new permanent building inspectors and bylaw enforcement officers during the 2022 budget deliberations. This was based on a request and a notice of motion initially, but as a result of certainly of the surge of building activity, building inspectors and bylaw enforcement officers have been spending more time meeting the demand for building permits and inspections due to the requirements of the Building Code Act, which is allowing certainly less time to focus on bylaw enforcement cases, which typically require multiple inspections before the issue is considered in compliance and can be closed. As I just noticed, or I just noted previously here, the forecast for growth in building activity certainly remains high for the foreseeable future. In summary, with regard to this quest, 85% of the costs required to fund these 2 positions can be covered through the Building Code Act, or what we also refer to as the Bill 124 Reserve Fund, which leaves only about $36,772 or 15% to be required from new tax-based funding. To offset this, we were also able to reduce 1 full-time equivalent in economic development through strategic reorganization and a realignment of the roles and responsibilities of our economic development officers, which resulted in a savings of approximately $41,175 in base. Therefore, from an overall community development departmental perspective, there's a base savings of just a little over $4,000 in terms of base budget dollars. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next presentation, which I believe is April. Gord.
Thank you, Council. I believe it might be
sorry.
me. No, that's all right. That's all right, Bruce.
I skipped a page.
That's okay. Good evening, Council. It's good to see your faces this evening, and welcome also to our members of the public who are listening in this evening. You'll see that from a corporate services perspective, we have 5 specific strategies to talk with you about that will be prioritized in the budget this year for the 2022 budget. And 3 of them reside in the human resources area, and the other 2 reside in the municipal governance area, all of which support either our corporate customer or our community customer in some particular way. The first one is our mental health strategy. And while mental health strategies have certainly been on the radar of human resource departments and Chatham-Kent's as well for many years, one of the things that we have not done is had a formal mental health strategy. We have provided services throughout the many years in really an ad hoc kind of way, and also looking at those areas as they're needed specifically, as opposed to developing a holistic approach across the organization. Certainly, COVID has punctuated the need for having a formal mental health strategy. No stranger to you are the challenges that have come out of people being isolated, including certainly some loneliness, depression, and other issues that they have dealt with. We don't foresee these challenges lightening anytime soon. And for that reason, we think it's important to proceed with the priority of establishing a mental health strategy through the course of 2022. Certainly municipalities have an opportunity to be able to demonstrate that they're leaders in the community supporting these kinds of goals and making sure that we're providing supports and reducing stigmas attached to them. what our aim would be is to actually move funds out of one of our reserves that deals with our corporate sick leave reserve and move some of those funds over to the mental health strategy. So moving it really from a reactionary kind of funding for these types of things to a preventative type of an approach. The second item that you see is our job evaluation tool. So under the Pay Equity Act, we have a requirement to achieve and maintain pay equity. And we do that right now in part through the use of our job evaluation tool, which allows us to not only meet our obligations under the Pay Equity Act, but it also helps us maintain our internal relative equity. Our job evaluation tool was implemented at the time of amalgamation, and job evaluation tools typically have a lifespan of about 15 years. Ours is 23 years and counting, and while it has held us this long because of the amount of maintenance that we have done to our positions over the years, it has certainly spent out its lifetime and is in a requirement to be replaced. And so in the budget this year, you'll see the request for a new job evaluation tool. And this is a supplemental request ultimately that will involve replacing our current job evaluation tool and providing training to implement it. And again, we are going to be looking at simply moving funds from our closed session reserve towards this particular item for funding purposes. The third item that you'll see on the list is our Human Resources Information System, or HRIS for short. Back in December, you had an opportunity to view a report that came to council on this subject that provided you further detail. So I will just give you a couple of high-level bullets for this evening. Back in 2019 and 20, you may recall having approved some funding for various system upgrades throughout the corporation, and one of them was towards a project to automate our performance management system internally. That work is underway. As the team is working through this particular project, we're also taking a look at challenges that it presents because performance management is part of our overall HRIS system. And the way that our system is currently set up is that we have various standalone systems and processes that have been used since amalgamation to manage our various HR functions. So things like our learning management, our leadership development, rather, our succession, our databases, our attendance tracking, all of those kinds of things. Many of these systems have reached the end of their life. They've become quite antiquated and not very reliable. And certainly, importantly, they're not integrated one to the other. So rather than replace each of these systems at the end of their life individually, our recommendation is to make sure that we do this in a collaborative and a concentrated effort, and to purchase an HRIS platform that will integrate all of those modules, maximize our efficiency and the functionality and so forth. This particular strategy was supported by the Core Services Base Budget Efficiency Review that was prepared by KPMG and that you saw in November of 2022. And this strategy is also supported by the Corporate Technology Strategic Plan. The next item on the list is our Corporate Information Management Initiative. And again, you heard a little bit about this back in October under our municipal governance section. From March to September, we had a management consultant firm conduct a current state analysis for us. They are an organization that focused primarily on information governance and compliance programs. That is among their specialty. And through the course of their analysis, not surprisingly, identified a number of gaps associated with our records management programs and the way that we go about records retention, training, disaster protection for records, and a series of other components. These gaps identified the need for additional staffing in this area, and there is a budget request contained in this budget for to meet those particular goals. And last but not least is our municipal prosecutor position. Right now, our municipal prosecutor is a 0.58 full-time equivalent. And the recommendation that you'll see before you in council this year is to move that position from a part-time position to a full-time position. Since about 2011, the Ontario Provincial Police provided a court officer to the municipality at no charge. And back in around November of 2020, that service discontinued. We've been working with the good help of our friends from the Chatham-Kent Police Services, who had been providing a court officer for a period of time. But given the backlog of cases that the courts are facing and the work that's required there, it's very difficult for them to continue to provide court services, and the prosecutor is in need of additional time to be able to meet the requirements of that particular position. So you will see a budget item included in there to move that municipal prosecutor from a 0.58 FTE position to a full 1 FTE position in the base budget. Council, for tonight in our open session, those are the priorities I'll be sharing with you this evening, and look forward to sharing with some others with you the evening of our closed session. And I'll move on now to April Redyke.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you, Budget Chair, and thank you, Council, for the opportunity to share some of the things that will be happening in 2022 that will impact community human services and potentially impact both this budget and budgets in the near future. On December 20th, Council had the opportunity to hear from the community and our Community Human Services team regarding the current state of housing and homelessness in our community. And while we made some really important steps on December 20th, there is still much work to do. And for 2022 and beyond, we as a community must focus on increasing the supply of affordable housing of all forms, so that everyone, regardless of their income, has a place to call home. And it will take not only some significant commitment from council, but also from the community at large to really look at making this happen. As we navigate through the remaining pandemic, and I have to think and believe in my heart that there will be an end to this, our CHS team will once again need to turn our attention to service integration and public health modernization. These are topics that came up, Gord had indicated earlier, when the current provincial government came into power, and certainly were both really put on hold during the pandemic. I would say that a great deal has been learned during the last 2 years. The pandemic has really forced us to look at things very differently than we did before, including the delivery of our programs and services. Both of these bullet points will impact public health, childcare and early years, housing, employment and social services. All of those divisions will be involved, and the impact that this really might have kind of depends on the outcomes of both modernization and integration and how that impacts budgets for future years. Certainly Gord and Steve have highlighted that we are receiving mitigation funding for 2022, but we have no indication from the province whether or not that will continue, certainly into 2023. Gord also mentioned achieving 4 hours of resident care for RVG. So the provincial government has mandated these 4 hours. You will see a significant number of FTEs in the 2022 budget that are specifically earmarked for Riverview Gardens. Those FTEs are 100% provincially funded, And what part the province is not funding is about $4,500 that looks at our technology licensing fees for those new FTEs. These 4 hours of care are part of a mandate that will impact all long-term care homes. And certainly, while the province has been very generous with this funding, a significant amount of money will come to Chatham-Kent to support this goal. Recruitment and retention of long-term care staff will not be easy. These have been some difficult years for our long-term care team, not only at RVG, but certainly right across the community. And it is leaving that profession very tired, albeit resilient. They are a very resilient retired bunch. So certainly throughout the next year, you will see us ongoingly recruiting for staffing at RVG. Omicron, like I said, will wane at some point. And again, I say I believe there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And as I indicated, as a community, we've learned a great deal throughout this pandemic. But I do believe that as we get into COVID-19 recovery planning, our libraries have shown time in and time again that they are able to pivot and certainly can be looked at as being community hubs to service our communities throughout Chatham-Kent. And I do see the opportunity, while neither one of these groups have, any significant budget asks for 2022, they are a really important part of our COVID-19 recovery. And as things return to whatever normal looks like, we will rely on them to bring some social activities, joy and recreation back to our community. The CKOHT, so our Chatham-Kent Ontario Health Team, has also had to learn to pivot over the last year. But the CK healthcare system is stronger because of the collaboration, and I am very proud to be part of our CKOHT. So again, while we do not have specific budget asks, these things need to be on our radar as we get ready to move into multi-year budgeting. So council will see we've talked about those transitional dollars that have been provided by the province to cover funding model changes and in effect downloads that are coming from the province to the municipality. They were to take effect prior to the pandemic. So again, and I think Gord and Steve have mentioned it, while it's good news for us for 2022, these changes will take effect at some point during the next term of council. So I don't think we can go through 2022 without really looking at the impact of all of our program services, divisions, and certainly our CHS department that receives significant funding from the province. And finally, from Community Human Services, the pandemic has really forced all of us to view and experience our world differently. And with this comes a time to really be innovative, to ensure we are planning for our future, and we are setting up our entire Chatham-Kent community for some success moving forward as we navigate out of COVID-19. So thank you, and I think I'm turning it over to Don Shropshire.
Thank you, April. Council, I only have one item to draw to your attention. It has to do with our insurance. Dave Taylor was in front of council in December, highlighting the increased cost of our premiums for our insurance coverage. At that time, we only had an estimate. Council will be receiving a full report on Monday night's council meeting, confirming the amount of coverage. But to highlight for the budget purposes, our insurance premium increased by 41.4%. So we went from a little over $1.4 million in premiums last year to just under $2 million. $1,980,882 is our anticipated premium. So it's a huge increase. The vast majority of that increase was attributed to large increases across the insurance sector. The insurance industry had some fairly major expenses in flooding, forest fires, in addition to some of the impacts from COVID. That was certainly a major contributing factor. We had our own claims that had to be considered that also impacted our insurance coverage, but that's an extraordinary expense. But I did want to make sure that that's highlighted because it does contribute to an increased budget amount that would be, in our mind, considered extraordinary but unavoidable. The other quick thing I'll mention is that at the time Dave presented in December to council, it was indicated that we were unable to acquire any cyber insurance. Our insurance broker has subsequently been successful in identifying someone that could provide that coverage. That'll be part of the recommendation coming forward to council on Monday evening. Thank you very much. I believe I'll be turning it over to Chief Case, who will be updating on fire and emergency services.
Thank you, Don. Good evening, council. Good evening, members of the community. I am the last on this evening. It very much feels like following Frank Sinatra on the stage at a karaoke bar, but I will do it my best. So what I'm presenting tonight is not being given to you as a recommended item in the binder based upon the situation we find ourselves in. However, as you know, both fire and EMS have had a particularly challenging year, especially in Wheatley, where crews have been on scene almost 24 hours a day since June. The asks that we're presenting in the binder very much focus around EMS, and they are based upon the annual report from our partners Levees that was brought to council earlier in the year. In a nutshell, this ask is to increase the hours of one of the part-time ambulances to make it a 24-hour ambulance to allow our EMS service to deal with some of the increases in demand that they continue to see, and to increase our provision during the weekend. Could I have the next slide, please? And also a recommendation from the annual report. This was a temporary move that was put in place to increase the service provision and the safety of our crews during the COVID pandemic. We didn't realize we were doing it quite this long. However, it has given us some lessons learned about how it enhances our system. And I have to give credit to not only the paramedics who are working in Herculean efforts to continue to serve the community, but also the managers from EMS who are working equally hard to keep the ambulances available and keep our code reds and code zeros incidences down to an absolute minimum. This would allow the supervisors to remain on a dedicated vehicle and be there to deal with crew issues, be able to manage the system and keep things running smoothly to allow the paramedics to continue to provide care. That is all I have for you, and thank you for listening, council.
Thank you, Chief Case. Just wanted to mention that Chief Khan is not with us tonight, but the Police Services Board will be presenting their budget ask to the Budget Committee on Thursday, July 27th. And you'll be hearing, you'll have a chance to ask the chief questions and hear their proposals. But I did want to highlight, I already highlighted one area tonight where there is the addition of 4 police cadets in the budget. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's the end of our presentation, and I'll turn it back to you for council questions.
Thanks, Gord. So at this time, if we have any questions of any of the presenters or any specific requests for information that we would like brought back for budget deliberations, we'll take those now. Councillor Harrigan.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Through you, I think this question is directed mainly to Gord, but also to Bruce. There was reference, Gord, in your presentation, and then Bruce, you reiterated around this concept of development charges and growth, paying for growth that council will be discussing in a few months' time from now, likely in the spring. If that's something that council goes forward with, how would that impact our current year revenues? And is that accounted for in the budget as it's presented?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. In the budget as presented, there is no revenue from development charges included in the budget because it's not yet approved by council. There is a long list of capital projects that are not yet funded that will assess our future budgets and can be included in our future planning to be funded from development charges, as it's directly tied to the growth that's occurring throughout the communities. So there is no impact on 2022 budget, whether council passes development charges or not. There will be a very positive impact on future budgets if it's passed.
Great, thank you. And my next question is directed to Mr. Kelly and also possibly Gord Clinton, which is just around our asset life cycle and our ability to complete budgeted projects within our asset life cycle. I know that infrastructure and engineering has talked to us a few times about project delays, and largely because of the lack of availability of vendors or contractors to perform the work, and also the significant amount of work. Can you comment on whether or not I don't know if I can ask this, if I'm going to ask this appropriately, if the budget that we have in our current fiscal year is in alignment with the labor force ability of IES? I'm trying to understand if our challenge with funding life cycle is one of just dollars, or if it also is a labor challenge.
Thank you, Gord. I guess I'll start on the answer to this. So every year we have a certain amount of money that we have within our account for life cycle spending. We have a list of priorities that starting with the highest worst case, most often used asset that needs to be replaced immediately. And then we work down from there. So the budget drives the amount of work. So with that, we have engineering estimates that we start with each project. We come up with a list of this is what we think we can accomplish. And then we use the purchasing policy to go out and actually confirm the figures at the end of it. And they're usually very close. But at the end of the day, it's the dollar figures that drive the number of projects. So when what we're going to run into because of what was described, the 5.3% annual increase, what we're seeing in inflation in construction, is that we're just going to be able every year to be able to accomplish less every year. And there will come a time when there should be an asset repaired, fixed, that we may not have to budget for, and we'll have to close the road or close the bridge. That's how we'll manage. So it's just managing by priorities always based on a fixed budget. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
It does. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions for tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was listening to Chief Case's presentation about the EMS service level enhancements and the ambulance hours not being recommended. I would like staff, I don't know which one, but I'm sure they'll figure it out, to bring back somewhere where we can fund this from reserves or whatever, so that we can debate it in the budget process. Is it okay to do that now, or should I be waiting until? I'm just trying to give them a heads up that I'm going to bring this forward. So start digging around to see where we can fund it, and then council can debate it.
I think that's exactly what these questions are meant for, so that you can provide some advance notice that something you'll be bringing forward, and to kind of give a heads up that you'll be looking for some suggestions from administration for possible funding sources. So
Thank you.
I see Gordon
And-
nodding his head, so it looks like it's something that we'll have ready to go for those deliberations.
All right, and if they could give me a heads up as to where they're getting it, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else with any questions or requests for information? I don't see any hands up, so if you were unable to raise your hand, just yell, I guess. Otherwise, we'll adjourn for this evening. Just before we do that, do you want to remind anyone who's watching that we do have the community consultations, as we noted, Wednesday the 19th at noon and Thursday the 20th at 7, and that budget deliberations will then take place the following week, January 26th and 27th at 6, and if required, February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd at 6. And encourage anyone from the community that wants to come forward with a deputation. As well, you can provide some feedback on Let's Talk CK. To adjourn for this evening, I'll read out the regular adjournment. The session of the Budget Committee meeting will recess until 6 o'clock on January 26th. As per the public notice bylaw, Chatham-Kent Council hereby gives public notice of its intention to hold public meetings and adopt the 2022 budget immediately following receipt of a recommended budget from the Chatham-Kent Budget Committee. The Budget Committee also gives public notice of the need to meet in closed session at any time during the budget deliberation process as permitted by the Municipal Act 2001. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Crew and Councillor Harrigan. Anyone opposed? I don't see any. So that's our adjournment for this evening. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you soon.